everyone, and welcome to another episode of Out on a Limb podcast with your hosts, Will, Allison, and Samantha, and continuing our promise to you that we have some great and amazing guests in 2024. We have with us Amy Gillespie Dougherty, who, among other things, is an award-winning author. She spent 6 years in Africa, and part of that was creating survival courses for African children. She's the founder of Irigenics, which is what I really want to dive into, which are ancestral eye readings, fantastic information that can be mined from the eyes. So we have a lot of exciting information for you all today. So welcome, Amy.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, we're so excited. Well, we met Amy when she was doing the eye readings for Illuminate festivals.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Are you still involved with Illuminate at all?
Yep. I just did an Illuminate festival, I think about a month ago. In November, I did an Illuminate festival.
Cool.
Right. Where we've met some fantastic people at those
Absolutely.
festivals. But at any rate, I think you had your eyes.
I did. Yes. The first one was at the Illuminate Festival. Yep.
And he was just fascinated and blown away. And matter of fact, you had a line out the door. I think you worked from the minute it opened till the minute it ended. And it's always that way because you have a unique process, a unique service that's so amazing. And we're going to get into that in more detail. But the other interesting thing that happened after we met was that you reached out because you were writing your first book. And I don't know at that time if you knew it was going to be a series, but your Ancestor series, the Ancestors Within series of books. There are 4 books now.
Mm-hmm.
You were writing the first one. You were the main author, and you.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
They're behind you. Correct. They are behind you, and you'll also see the one that I contributed to is at the bottom of this deck right here. The Ancestors Within, book 1.
Yep.
Yeah.
But you reached out to Will actually, and you were compiling 25 authors or so to write a chapter in this book about kind of how the modality that you work with, these authors work with, can contribute to the understanding of our ancestral history, ancestral trauma, how to heal that, all of that sort of stuff. And I wrote back because he's not a writer, and that is not up his alley. And
you would have written it for me anyway, so you know.
So it's either I ghostwrite for him, or I just go ahead and write the chapter based on what I do, which is the hypnosis practice.
Yeah.
And so I did. I wrote that, and that was such a fun chapter to write. Tell me about your inspiration for that series, by the way.
So I want to say it was January 6th. What was our day that the White House had such trauma?
Oh, God, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
On that morning, in my morning meditation, I channeled a message that said I was going to write books all about ancestral connection, about ancestral origin, engaging our ancestors, embracing our ancestors, celebrating our ancestors, and really with an ultimate goal of helping people understand ancestral dynamics, especially as it relates to self-esteem and self-destructive patterns, and especially to work with kids, foster placements, adoptees, those who are just really struggling and say, well, I don't know my ancestors. I don't know anything. And so it was about a 20-minute meditation. And that was, I think it was a Wednesday morning, I want to say. And by noon, I was under contract for the first book. And by Saturday, I was under contract for 4 books.
Isn't that amazing? Wow.
That's ancestors.
Yeah, right.
Specifically, this topic is near and dear to your heart because...
Well, a couple of reasons. One, I am adopted. And so I, as a child, had this mantra, I want to find my family, like out of a bad cartoon. And my poor adopted parents were so gracious about it. I mean, they were just so gracious. I ran away from home. I had elaborate plans. I had a horse lined up 2 miles down the road to get to Iowa. I mean, I was 5, right? I was like on a mission, and now I'm like this about it. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I put them through that. But what I realized now as an adult is I was looking for me. Why did I have a talent for music? Why did I have a talent for writing? Where did these things come from? Why do I have 2 different colored eyes? Where did it come from? And as I went forward in life, I had a family tragedy with my adopted family where my sister, who was my parents' only child, she died in my arms in an accident when I was 10 and she was 2. And from there, child safety became very important to me. And eventually I wound up in Mozambique, Africa, doing survival skills training programs for kids. And when I came back to the States, I thought, well, what harms American kids? And it was really the self-destructive behaviors, the suicide patterns, the lack of really authentic self-esteem building, where they actually could buy into it right away and say, I get it. I never thought of that, kind of thing. And so that's kind of how the whole pathway came to be. So ancestors, I met my birth mother at age 19 and met my birth father at age 54. My mother and I worked for the same company, sat at the same desk at least once when we were each 18 years old, unbeknownst to each other, because I didn't meet her till I was 19. My father profiled fingerprints. When you turn your fingerprints into the government to have them look at it, that's his software. And I profile eyes.
Wow.
So the first time we met, which was just a few years ago, the first time we met, so we're having, a glass of water in this restaurant and we're talking and he's like, give me fingerprints. And I'm like, give me eyeballs. And I'm sitting there thinking, we are like a pair of genetic anomalies. We're like out of some crazy zoo. The similarities were absolutely undeniable. And so many places we crossed paths. And with my grandparents who I never met, I wanted to become a zoologist. And my grandfather was a zoologist at Northwestern before he became one of the original Mayo Clinic doctors, or one of the early Mayo Clinic doctors. And so it's just a whole trail of these crazy synchronicities that, had I known about ancestral imprinting, I could have known all these things were inside of me, whether I knew who my ancestors were or not. Mm-hmm. So I really want to help people who are struggling with family dynamics to get through that and understand that these are not personal battles. These are great places to intersect some ancestral patterns and rewrite them.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's so fantastic. Thank you for encapsulating that whole background. But so
that was amazing.
When you got back from Africa, my understanding is then you were kind of looking for, like you said, that way to help children and youth and really all of us, because I think the number one issue that people struggle with is self-worth and identity and who are we and, why do we exist? What's our purpose? What's our mission? What's valuable about us, right? So how do these readings, first tell us what the readings are, how does it work? And then how has that helped people?
That's a great question. So the way the readings work is I take a macro photo of the eyes and I'm looking at what were you loaded up with, gifts, talents, abilities, ancestral patterns, as well as unresolved traumas. And so if you've had anything that's weird, bizarre, unique, would only happen to you or happens to you over and over again, or happened up to age 8 to 10, it's ancestral. Now, lucky enough, we get somewhat of a treasure map in our eyes to give us a little bit of a pathway to that information, especially when we don't know it. So that's kind of what the readings are all about. And I got started when I was taking a course on conscious language. People who say, oh, I never win. I can never get along with my mother-in-law. I'm never going to lose this weight. And they're just self-propelling forward. And it was a class taught by a man who did something called biooptic holography, looking at the 7 layers of the eyes. And I thought, well, that's just the coolest thing, right? And so I went forward and forward and forward, training with different people in different modalities until I came to my aspect of ancestral eye reading. Now, how does it help people? I'll just throw out a couple of examples. I had a gal who, she was just like 14 and her mom brought her for a reading. And she was this girl who was like, I don't know. She wouldn't commit to anything. Well, her eyes said that she was incredibly brilliant and quite an overachiever. Like there were huge achievement rings in her eyes. And so I said, okay, your job for the next 4 years of high school is the words I don't know don't exist. You need to tell me what you do know. Okay. Did you like the book? I like the main character. I love the cover. Just tell me what you like. Change your frame and bring what you like. Within 3 years, she got accepted into a school for gifted children and went on to study forensic science. So She went from this B student wanting to be popular, not wanting to be marked out as that brainiac, to someone who was incredibly intelligent and incredibly successful.
Wow. That is fantastic. I love it. Now, the nitty gritty in terms of this eye reading, when you look at the left and the right, and both of them can be quite different. Yes. And you actually tell me some of the markers. What are the things that you're looking for? Like you see people, You see actual ancestors. You see some crazy stuff in the eyes.
There is that. So some markers, let me tell you a few markers. Oftentimes there's patterns for escape. So if you've ever in your life been in a situation where you wanted to scream, let me up, let me go, let me out, you're looking at an ancestral pattern. But for me, I can see that marking right in the eye just while I'm taking a look. Gifts for music in the left eye or for writing. Left eye is the creative, spiritual, personal writing. When you go to the right eye, it's more the technical, research, organized writing, genealogy, that kind of thing. So looking at gifts. Also, when someone's had a trauma early in their life, the pupils take shape by about age 2 or 3. So we call that preconscious memory. Like we don't remember having our diaper changed. We're not going to remember whatever's imprinted in our pupils, but our cells do. So what you'll find is when people have taken on kind of an oval shaping in their pupils, it's where they've had some kind of high impact trauma early in life. Now, it doesn't mean somebody was abusive. It can be as simple as falling out of the crib or a doctor coming at you with an oxygen mask or a nurse holding you down for a shot. But it's the kind of thing where you were terrified and you moved either from physically feeling everybody's everything or emotionally feeling everybody's everything to now analyzing things, because it's much easier to think about being sad than it is to feel being sad. So now you've moved your personality a little bit. You've gone through a personality change. Another marker, and one of my, really the reason that I am so passionate about doing ancestral eye reading. I was at an expo in Pennsylvania, and there was a Navy admiral who asked me what it was I was doing. And he was a retired gentleman, quite, you could see he was an accomplished man, that smooth confidence, nice guy, having a conversation, curious, what are you doing over here kind of thing. And so I explained it to him and I said, well, one marker that we see in the eyes is the experience of the parents with their child's pregnancy. So in my left eye, I see my mother's experience of her pregnancy with me. In my right eye, I see my father's experience of his pregnancy, of my pregnancy for him. And so I can see that, at 4 weeks, my mother was going, uh-oh. Whereas my father wasn't informed until 9 weeks. And there's him going, uh-oh. So as I was talking to this gentleman, I said, in military kids especially, so often we'll find a child who can't hear I love you from the parent because maybe the conception happened during a military furlough or right before active duty. And the parents in the morning were like, oh my gosh, I thought we were using birth control. We can't be pregnant. I'm about to go on active duty. There was some kind of glitch in the system. Now the child knows nothing about this, but their cells imprint, I'm not wanted. And in the case of this admiral, I looked up and he had tears running down his face. And he was, such a confident man, and he said, Amy, you must continue doing this work. You must do this. He said, we went to therapy with my son for 5 years and this conversation never happened. And he said, I heard it right now. That is exactly why he took his life. He could never hear I love you from me. He could never hear it, no matter how we bonded, how much we told him. He said he could never hear it. And in all that therapy, this conversation never happened. And I said, most times the child just needs the rest of the story. At the time we got pregnant, I was furious. But 9 months later, when I held you in my arms, oh my gosh, I just can't explain the love I felt. Or, I struggled through you being a little infant. I was terrified I was going to drop you or something. And so I was kind of standoffish. But boy, when you were 5, the kids just their cells need to hear the rest of the story. And so that's a big part of my work.
That is amazing how, and I think we know it maybe intellectually, but we don't understand how our consciousness imprints, how all of those things imprint on our actual physical body, our cells, not just our emotional body or our mental body, but our physical body.
Yeah. And nobody did anything wrong, right? Those people had exactly the feelings that anyone would have had in their situation at their time. My parents weren't married, so this pregnancy during high school was like, oh, no, 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 right? I mean, that's not anybody doing anything wrong. And that's what's most important especially for young people to understand. Their parents didn't really do anything wrong. They didn't do anything wrong. We just need to understand the dynamics that are playing through our cells and why our internal body and cells scream, I'm not wanted. Nobody wants me. Or there's something wrong with me. I see this one all the time when there was some kind of medical scare about the baby. So when we look at these COVID babies now, in about 12 years, we're going to see a lot of kids with maybe a weird pattern that they just can't hang up of what's wrong with me? What's the matter with me? And the words tell us exactly where it started from. There was something where there was a fear about something being wrong with the child. What if I got a vaccine? How will that impact the in utero fetus, right? So these are just really important things as we go forward, especially from this COVID place going forward, to see how it's all going to play out and to really help them through that time.
That's amazing.
What happens when you you get to the source of, that feeling that occurred, that, what was wrong with them? What is awareness enough, or do you proceed with some form of therapy or recommend therapy, or where do you go from there?
So awareness is the big key, right? Like now when you hear yourself saying it, like I say all the time, oh, it's my fault. And I always blamed it on growing up Catholic and, coming through an orphanage and whatnot. But, it was my parents going, it's my fault. I went to that party. I drank that wine. You know what I mean? It kind of plays. So yes, awareness is huge. But beyond that, sometimes we have patterns where it's other people, right? Other people who drop the ball, other people who lie to us or betray us or harm us, right? It's other people. And so in that moment, what I'll tell people is embrace for a moment, just stop for a moment. What would normally make you scream, you never listen to me, right? It's a big pattern. It comes up a lot. And when you're at that moment that would normally make you scream that, stop for just a moment and say, oh, that is so ancestral, right? And after you get through that kid, put a little humor on it, lighten it up, unplug that cellular energy, and then love on those ancestors. I don't know whose this was, but I am so sorry this happened to you, because it really stinks right now in 2023. But you know what? I got a cell phone. I got legalese. Think of what do you have that your ancestors didn't have that you can rewrite this pattern. We can get our email back on Gmail for like 5 seconds, right? That's another big pattern that shows up. Letting something go in the mail that we regret. Signing something we regretted, right? Escape rooms. Somebody had an ancestral pattern. We got escape rooms now, right? And so use what we got now to right? Beat the pattern, right? Don't engage the beast. Breathe for a moment, and then let's kind of, work our way forward from there, kind of thing.
So once that awareness sets in after a reading and they have that, that moment and they understand that about themselves and they recognize that in the ancestral aspect. If they were to come back to you and say 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, is there a restructuring that takes place then in the eye that you can noticeably see when there's acceptance to that?
I adore that question. So when I first did my first training, yay! When I first started training with all these people with these different modalities, I was like, okay, I'm going to go take somebody's eye pictures and then we're going to send them to the spa or send them for some Reiki or send them for this, that, or the other thing. And then when they come back, they're going to have totally different eyes. And it didn't happen. And the first guy I trained with started in iridology. And so for him, the eyes changed all the time. He's like, they change all the time. But then I was like, no, wait a minute. If someone's born with a pattern in sibling rivalry with sisters in their left eye, and they're the oldest child, how does that work? They don't have any sisters yet. Why is it there? And so as I kept going forward and training with more and more people, that's when I realized it's not their pattern with sisters, it's their ancestors. So to give you an answer, Will, 2 things. One, the structural aspects of the eye don't change. They're kind of like biblical scripture, right? You open the Bible one time and there's something that just leaps out at you. And the next time you read it, you don't even notice it. You're like, where was that passage again? I can't find it. But something else just tears at your heart and says, oh, this is so important right now. So the actual map doesn't change. But as Allison mentioned, there are ancestral images in the eyes. You can see them on my website. I've got a gallery of pictures, and this is where I can't explain. We're now in the woo-woo. Now we're ghost hunting in the eyes. The girls I'm telling you, the girls at Walgreens tell me what I do is creepy cool. And
Right.
it is a little bit. So when you take those images, the images that are in the structure of the eyes, in the actual fibers, they'll be there every time. But the ones that we call more like energetic impressions that are like in the moisture on the eye, in the pupil, in the sclera, or kind of in the moisture, like a water reflection, like looking at a water drop on a leaf.
Yeah.
Those will be different every time you take the pictures. You'll see different people. You'll see two people racing a horse. You'll see a dog. You might see hieroglyphs or rune stones, or I've had people who actually have like letters in their
Wow.
name. Like, wow. So there's all kinds of wild.
There
amazing-
is something very creepy, but yet very fascinating when you have a high resolution image of your eye.
Yeah.
And just that aspect of it, not the whole aspect, but just the pupil area, that area. There is something very, very interesting. And I've had it done twice, and it's just, I mean, if nothing more, I love just staring at it because it is so
Right?
fascinating. It's
Great.
very nebulous. It's very
calls to you.
it's very galactic looking. It's it's like a galaxy that's forming, and it's very
Yes.
it's very interesting.
And just like your biblical example, what's fascinating is what you will see in my eye reading and what I will see in my eye reading
Exactly.
also depend upon like what our priorities are, what our perspective or whatever.
Yeah.
Because when you did mine, we were just, I think, getting really hot and heavy into the pet channelings.
Yeah.
So my
Mhm.
focus was very much on the animal kingdom, and I saw
Ah,
at least
Yeah.
one animal, if not more than that, in my
You
eye.
had owls, and yeah, you had different animals in your eyes for sure. And as you said, so each time, the thing is, there isn't anyone who doesn't have at least 200 images in their eyes. I mean, they're just all over the place in there. Some are like so clear, you're like, oh my gosh, look at that.
Yeah.
And I mean, will come a day someday when we do maybe an art gallery exhibit, framing out the
Ah.
eye images, because some people just have some amazing, amazing. And every time, like I say, every time you do those pictures, they're a little different. And iris photography, and I'm glad for this because I'm not a photographer by nature, but iris photography is becoming such a big thing now. There's more and more and more people, and even like there's a company called iMazy where they've developed a photo booth for eyes, and you can go in and they make artwork for like above your sofa, and you can do like your whole family,
Now
like
that's
all four eyes.
kind of weird.
Yeah, I don't think I could.
Instead of
Yeah,
having you and the
you're
family and
really-
the dog above your couch, you have now, this,
Right.
a series of
Iris-
eyeballs looking at you.
That's exactly right. And they got slowed down with COVID. When COVID happened, they were just doing their patenting in America, and they got stopped because of the whole COVID thing.
Yeah.
And so now they're just starting to come back and be present here. But the man who builds my cameras told me he's now sending cameras all over the world to people taking iris photography as an artistic medium. And I'm like, well, great, because then we've got those photos to read, and it's always great to read from someone else's photos.
Yeah, it's a great archive that's starting to be amassed, as far as, the information that you can glean from.
Do you ever do like a celebrity, eye reading thing, like, where you just grab some celebrity's eye and like look at that real closely and just start touting off a couple of things?
It would be great if you could actually get in like deep enough to actually see those markings in the eyes. My one celebrity was Dee Wallace from E.T., the mom.
Oh, okay.
Cool.
And I was like, oh my gosh, we got a little challenge here with the church and religious ideals and cultural ideals of the time. And she was like, yeah, yeah, she had just fabulous eyes. What a neat lady. So it's an area. I'm actually going to be in Los Angeles in February, and so I'm kind of hoping to have that opportunity. That's one of my challenges right now, is because currently I'm kind of the only person. I've put this all together over the last 11 years. And just before COVID, I trained a couple people, but then COVID happened and everything got kind of wild. And then we jumped into the books and all these other aspects. So now I'm at that fork in the road of how can I distribute this? How can there be someone other than just me who can do an ancestral eye reading? And so that's a very big emphasis for 24 and 25, for 2024 and 25.
Wow. So what's interesting though is that, you are very much about ancestors, hence the 4 books. And we'll talk about that a little more deeply, but
Mhm.
the eyes are about even so much more than that. Like you can see a galactic perspective, you can see animals, you can see, like you said, all of these, the history of trauma or things that are embedded in the cellular structure.
Mhm.
So how was your first love and passion really more about ancestors, or did that come as a result of these eye readings? Or was it kind of both?
So when I started, this is a great question. I really did not pinpoint ancestral, right? I was training with all these different people who did behavioral iridology, who did bioopticalography, who did all these different pieces. And like I said, this thing about siblings just kept nagging at me. I was like, it doesn't make any sense. What if one sibling dies? What if you don't get any brothers? What if, blah, 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 blah. And then I got to someone, Denny Johnson, who was teaching about birth order and grandparents and family lines, six generations. And I was like, that's it. This is our ancestors aspect, right? And so that's when all the interpretations started taking form for me, where I was like, oh my gosh, look at this. Now, along the way, I was thinking, gosh, that looks like a baby, or that looks like an old man with suspenders, or, but I didn't say anything because I was working actually in Colorado with social workers, Department of Corrections, Boys and Girls Club, right? So I was trying to stay pretty academic, and so I was like, that looks like this, looks like that. Well, when I got out east, my husband said, nobody knows about this. You have to start sharing this. You have to start doing shows. And it was actually at Edgar Casey's ARE in
Yeah.
Virginia Beach that I did my first show in 2018. And like you said, after that, it just took off. Well, so I did this for a year or so, now getting such large quantities of peoples by going to these holistic fairs and expos where I'd be doing 30 people, 60 people, 40 people in a day, all these pictures coming at me. And suddenly people were saying, but don't you see that woman in my eye? Don't you see that man? Don't you see that dog? And so finally one day I was like, all right, God, if this is where it's supposed to go, let the games begin. And it just took off from there. And actually, Will, it was that the show that I read Your Eyes down in Charleston,
Mhm.
that there was an image of a man in this woman, just in the inside of her sclera. But he was so bold on that little viewfinder on my camera that people like 3 tables over were like, oh my God, there's a man in her eye. And I said, well, there's a man in everybody's eye. You're not going to find anyone who doesn't have 200 images in their eye. And then it was a flood of people. I think I was there until like 8:30 that night. Like they just
Yeah.
wouldn't stop. And that happens to me a lot at shows, that people will just keep coming and coming. I'm like, we got it. We're done. We have to clap. We have to lock
Wrap
it.
up. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So this year, my first phase of how am I going to deliver this is we're creating an app for people to be able to start taking their own eye photos and start reading their own eyes.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Now, I think Allison really nailed that with, and Will did also, that what each person sees in the eyes can be quite different. Now, I'll take, an image like that man and I'll oval it where there's no missing it. It's like, oh, wow, there's a man there, or there's a woman there, there's, a baby. But what I really want is for people to realize those images are in there and they can take their own eye photos and they can start looking and learning.
Mhm.
And the truth is, much of what I read in an eye reading, I could glean just from listening to tell stories about your life. He never listens to me. Oh my gosh, I had this wife and she was this, and this. I could just start drawing your eyes, right?
Yeah.
I could just start drawing them. Like, okay, that's going to be at 8 o'clock. That's going to be at 11 o'clock. We're going to see that one at noon, and so I could just start drawing people's eyes. So it's really, you can find your own stuff. But again, for people who don't know their origin, who don't know really much of anything about their ancestry, it's such a fabulous place to dive in and be like, who's that woman in that dress with the hair, with the hat, with the, and I mean, I've had some
It's
fascinating people. I had a woman, she had an image in her eye of a female cadet, 40s, 50s, 1940s, 1950s. And I was like, who is she? And she was like, oh, that's my great grandmother. She was on the Philadelphia Project, right? I mean, the people who appear are just, it's just an amazing experience. And that part, all I can think of is, and I'm just going to kill his name again. Help me out. The man who does the photos of water.
Oh, Mr.
Mas-
Moto.
Emoto.
That's it.
Emoto.
I know, I was gonna back.
The eyes are moist. right? There's a lot of moisture in there. And so I always think of him with, can he really explain why the images change when you say a different word or feel a different word for the water? It's really, and our eyes are the only thing in our body that's full size when we're born. We don't go into them. They're full size from the beginning. And they're also, as I understand, they're the only human aspect that's the same size in every single human.
Oh, wow. I know that.
There's nothing else. Brains are bigger, heads are bigger, but the eyes, the actual eyes are the same size in every human within like this teensy, teensy, teensy. It's the only part. So you got two aspects. So all I can call it is my personal theory from my work is I think what we're seeing is like if you slice the DNA helix, you know how we see the ladder, the helix, like if you sliced it, like slicing a tree, I think we're really looking into the fiber optics. We're looking into
Wow.
Oh,
neurosynapses and connectors. I would never be able to prove it, but it's something for, someone
concept.
who's in that area to take a look at. Is that possible that what we're seeing is the rounded, from each eye?
Well, I'm curious, when you're going over these eye readings with a client, how often, and you're identifying these people per se, how often do they know who those people are, or how frequently do they actually write you later and say, hey, I figured it out?
Mhm.
That's a great question. So I would say I've had in thousands of readings, I've probably had, I don't know, 300 that have come back and said in the moment, oh my God, the gentleman in Charleston, she said right away, oh my gosh, that's my great grandfather. I always felt so close to him. But it's not that often that people know, at least in that moment, or if they write me back. But I have had people like pull out a photo and be like, oh my gosh, this is my great grandmother. This is, this was so and so. This was so and so. I've had people tell me they're sure it's the baby they lost
Mm.
to a miscarriage, those kinds of things. So I mean, it's fascinating because a lot of times they don't know. And again, every time you look, you'll see different things, which is why I'm such a big advocate and where I hope to be able to take the app. Technology is changing so much with cell phones now. I'm hoping to be able to take the app to like a photo gallery where when you see an image, you can oval it, you can lift it, and you can, put it in a gallery. Because when you look 2 weeks from now, you might be like, what happened to the bride? Right? What happened to the baby? Where'd they go? Kind of thing.
Wow.
But I would say 1 in 50 to 100 says, oh my gosh, I know that photo. That photo was hanging in our house when I was a child.
Oh,
I
gosh.
know that person. So sometimes and they're my favorites, of course, because it just helps me to look harder, look more. And that's Irigenics will just continue to grow. If there's a gift for writing at 6 o'clock, all the gifts are in there. So I really want to be able to break from shows a little bit and get back more into that research discovery side of it.
Well, this reminds me of that I think it's a website or it's, I don't know, Facebook thing, whatever, Faces and Things.
Mm.
And people submit stuff
Oh,
that,
right,
like
yes.
you're like, I see faces all the time, like in
Mother Mary
wallpaper.
and peace. In a
Right?
bucket.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
Jesus on my toast. Yeah, that kind of.
I see faces looking back at me all the time, like, and I feel like I could just outline it, and just say, can't you see the dog? Can't you see this? So is it's you're saying it's not that it's there's some molecular something coming together that is presenting what is needed to be seen at that time.
Mm.
I personally feel like during my lifetime, I will never know everything there is to know about what we're looking at in those eyes. For the most part, I think, yes, there's a molecular or a universal consciousness reflection or echo. Like I said, kind of like Emoto's work, like for whatever reason, it imprints here, just like this, like a moment captured in time. And so when well, I mean, certain patterns, you only get one chance to work out, right?
Yeah.
Your mother only dies once. Right? I mean, you have certain patterns that you got one time of reenacting. So, for example, my birth father, unfortunately, suddenly passed away this last summer. And so I flew to Minnesota to go to his funeral, and I was at my aunt and uncle's house the afternoon before the funeral, and someone stole my rental car with all my clothes in it.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, this is so ancestral. I'm like, whose was this? This is the third time in my life I've had my clothes stolen. Okay. So I'm like, it makes it way ancestral. I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know whose this was, but give me a break. So I go to the funeral the next morning. I'm meeting 60% of my family for the very first time as a 58-year-old, 57-year-old. I'm meeting my family for the first time. And I get to my aunt and uncle's house, and this woman says to me, "I'm sorry, I don't know who you are." And she's my first cousin. She's the next grandchild. I'm the oldest, 7 years older than everyone, the illegitimate, and she's the first legitimate grandchild. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, your parents didn't tell you. I'm like, this is so ancestral, right? And so I explained to her, who I was. Who would go to a funeral in a skirt, right? My clothes are stolen. I'm wearing shoes from Costco. I'm wearing a skirt and a sleeveless black tank.
Oh my God.
What's my cousin wearing? A sleeveless black tank and a black skirt and shoes just like mine.
Wow.
What?
It would never have happened ever if that car hadn't been stolen. Ever on this planet, it would never have happened. And her stepmom was wearing the same outfit, except she had a white skirt. But I was just like, you couldn't make it up. And so I have my first family picture with my
Everybody
whole
is-
family
Right.
at my father's funeral. Right.
Your ancestors are up there just having a ball.
Oh, they're laughing, right? Come on. So if it's weird, bizarre, unique, would only happen to you, it happens over and over again. Right. But no, like we're just doing test runs with the app now. We're doing trial runs, and I just took photos of my eyes, and my blue eye was just like exploding with images. And I was like, who are you people? I'm looking in there, and I'm, you see traces of who you're sure is this or that. But so much of what we see was never photographed.
Yeah.
The people, I know sometimes I'm seeing young children, from the era, from the clothes, from the hair, cameras didn't exist yet. And so I love when I get people who actually know their stuff. They've actually are like genealogy buffs and are all about their ancestry and can identify. But I will say, typically, if it's an image in the sclera or the pupil, those are usually the ones that people know more so than what's in the fibers. Interesting, huh?
So just on because you know me, I'm techie. I love tech. So the app, there's no special thing you have to put on the camera. It's just going to be the app, and use the camera from the app. The back camera or the front camera?
You can decide, because it'll be set up that you can either upload a photo, you can take a selfie, or you can have someone else take it. So it can be from the front or the back. We're working through the technology now. We have a launch plan for February. I just got the first trial of, okay, test it out and see what makes no sense and rewrite the instructions and whatnot. So we got a ways to go yet. We haven't quite released anything. We're working through trademarks and that. But we'll probably hit you up for being on our beta testers. Like,
I was just going to ask you
It's so exciting.
if I could be on the beta test. Because
sign up, man, sign up.
And how
Print
in
that.
depth is that going to be, that like compared to?
Yeah, so first round, the rule of making a new app is pick your most valuable pieces and make them perfect.
Yep.
Right. So the first rendition of the app is really going to be, can everybody get a photo of their eyes, or can only millennials who are like born with a camera in their right? So first run's going to be getting the eye photo, and I have an eye quiz currently on the Irigenics website, and the initial app is going to be quite similar to that. Can people get through taking their eye photo and figuring out their intuitive type based on that? So it is the first run will be the light run. But then after that, we're going to go into things like the rings, which are there when you're born. And when we've done studies with them against the Clifton Strengths Finder skills assessment, it's been over 90%. If you've got achievement rings in your eyes, you will test as achievement as one of your top 5 vocational skills. If you have a ring of focus, it's over 90% that you will come out as ring of focus one of your top. So we're going to move into things like the pupil, things like the rings, the things that people can clearly read. Then after that, it's probably going to go more into the imagery, you being able to see those images and get those images. And then I've got to figure out from there, am I going to license and train people how to do this? Am I going to put out a book or videos all about it? How am I going to hand off? Because I'm definitely at that point in life of saying, I got to share this. I got to get this out there.
So so we're taking a
Oh, I like the birds.
little caveat here. Because you've built up such a library of imagery, of eye imagery and all that. And this is just popped in my head as you're talking about it. I mean, it's almost ripe for utilizing a component of AI of being able to
Be able to read it.
scrub that
Mhm.
breadth of imagery that you already have to be able to assist with that image that's taken from the app of saying, okay, well, here's some of the things that are present based upon this scope of imagery that's already there. And then
You're exactly right. And we're hoping we're going to be able to start going that direction, that we can start moving it that direction. There's so much that the eye structure, there's basically 5 structures or 4 structures plus an anomaly. And that tells so much about a person's personality. I mean, that just tells so much about how they respond, how they respond to things like that. But as far as the ancestral traumas, yeah, I think we can eventually make a clock map where the AI can at least identify it and throw a question at you like, wow, it would seem that you've had distinctive experiences with escape.
Yeah.
And some people will latch onto that right away. They'll be like, oh my gosh, I was locked in a shed when I was 5, right?
My little brother stuck me in here, in the refrigerator.
It, right? The doorknob, right? The chair under the doorknob thing, right? But then you'll have others. I had a couple at an Illuminate festival, I think Frederick, Maryland. And it was a child, and I was like, what's with the escape thing? And they're like, no, 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 no. And then like 10 minutes later, her older sister goes, wait a minute, remember when she was locked in the bathroom on the airplane and 3 stewardesses were trying to get her out of there?
Oh my God, that would be.
That's exactly what I'm
Really
talking about. And for 10 minutes, you haven't figured this out. And so sometimes people just kind of fight with what might be there, or they just don't, it doesn't click.
It's the same as doing mediumship readings. You can sit with somebody for an hour and bring up all this information, and it isn't until they get back home and all of a sudden it just starts flooding back in. It's like they're a definite no while they're sitting in front of you.
Yep.
But they get home.
Yeah.
An hour later, you get an email
there.
saying, "Oh my God, wait a minute! This is this. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Caution flags are up and whatnot.
Yep.
One of the neat things about what you do, though, is it's not just woo-woo like you're demonstrating. There's so much research.
Yes.
You said 90%, will show that characteristic or whatever. So this is really helpful in bridging the gap between the spiritual and the scientific, right? Which is
right. I mean, I can't explain the woo-woo at all. Why is great Uncle Ralph in your eye? I tell you that. Right. And can we find him next week? Maybe. Right.
Think about it. If we're creator beings and, we created this world around us, and you're saying that each time you look at it, you're seeing something different. Well, it's whatever needs to be seen at that time.
Right.
So you're creating that experience and those whatevers come back at you so you can release something at that time. There, I've solved it.
Well done, Samantha. We knew you'd raise overachievers, right?
The other thing that you've alluded to a couple of times, but haven't really explained, I want to make sure it's clear, is you keep saying something like gifted for writing at 6 o'clock. So you have a clock paradigm that you put over top, and these characteristics show up at particular points on that clock.
Particular points. That's the part Will was speaking of, where you could go to AI. But again, for me, I still feel we're just in the birth stages, right? If that gift for writing is there, then all gifts should be there. And it's really hard at this point, without greater database, to cut and paste an eye reading, because there's influences from both sides, right? So for example, sibling rivalry with girls in the left eye is also, it can be creative competition, band, choir. Remember I'm just going to age all of us, but remember the Nancy Kerrigan ice skating thing, Tanya Harding? I'm telling you, that's at 4 o'clock, left eye, all day long. I mean, I can hear a story like that. I'll be like, put a mark there, put a mark there, put a mark there, put a mark there, kind of thing. But will I know when I do the reading that this was about a creative competition or a sibling competition or catty jealousy? how come Allison always gets this? How come Allison always gets that? Whether it comes from a guy or a girl, I won't know that. The person I'm reading will. And you kind of alluded also to, even now, I kind of hold myself into that academic area kind of as much as I can. I don't really ever let myself go like, here I go trance medium, and now I'm going to really read your eyes from a trance medium point. And some of that's ancestral, and some of that's just, let's take our time before we, open all the doors. Someone else is more than welcome to sit down with their eye pictures and do that medium reading for them.
That's
And
tarot. I mean, because tarot's like, I'm going to lay these down and I'm going to paint a picture. And it's up to you to plug in the various elements into this, because you're talking about a dark-haired man or whatever. You're not saying specifically. So you're doing the same thing, and letting the person decide what the woo
Fill in the
is.
rest of the blanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right. Although things do pop in every once in a while where I'll be like, like some people think like you have a very creative ability, but you maybe don't recognize it. Like some people build race cars and they don't realize that that's really creative. It's really artistic. And they'll be like, I've been building race cars for the last 25 years, or whatever the case is. Sometimes they'll just pop in with this, like, yeah, you nailed it. But I try to stay as close to the academic as I can. There's just so much more to be learned yet, so much more to explore.
So what's also interesting is that you were born with two different color eyes.
Right.
So what does that say in the readings? Does that have any bearing on the reading?
Well, what's really interesting is I had kind of ignored eye color. I mean, but really eye color does tell us quite a bit about origin. Blue eyes have only been on our planet for about 10,000 years. Amber eyes, those who have eyes that look like they're gold or yellow, that is from people that have this long ago origin of the really high level esoteric training. Like if you think Lemuria, Atlantis, but coming forward like through Abydos, Heliopolis, Alexandria, the high level training schools. So if you ask a Native American, they'll tell you that having a brown eye and a blue eye is one who can communicate both with heaven and earth. But my brown eye is actually amber. And people with the amber eyes come from an origin of people who were very gifted at synchronized movement, right? So think of generations of developing that skill. Generations, usually there's a higher level of telepathy, like you and somebody else wind up at the store at exactly the same time without talking to each other, or wearing the same clothes at the same time without talking to each other. Those people come from a long ago ancestry of generations and generations and generations of having to move as one hunting, or having to move as one in defending the community, where they had to know if they bump into somebody, whether it's a friend or a foe, before they swing around and kill their brother, right? And so, or being out at sea for months and suddenly saying, I've got to get home. The baby needs baobab bark or needs whatever. So there is actually more about origin in there. What's kind of funny about it is my brown eye actually has blue on the top, and a bit, it winds up looking like a butterfly or almost like the phoenix rising.
Wow.
And so one thing to kind of keep in mind too is, like, people could say nobody could be a descendant of Jesus, just as an example. But Jesus has a mother, right? He came through a mother's womb, right? And so they have common ancestors, right? People have common ancestors with Michelangelo. People have common ancestors with Queen Elizabeth or with whoever. So even though someone didn't have children, maybe they went to a monastery, or, when you look at like Mother Teresa, you can still have common ancestors and you all got some of that same thread, right? So people will also say, well, I don't have any kids, so what does it matter if I sort out my ancestral stuff? Well, but there's kind of a ripple effect. There's all these cousins you don't know about. So our DNA is made up of 11 generations, which is over 4,000 ancestors inside of us. None of us knows exactly who we're tied to. And so when we heal a pattern, when we resolve, I usually will say resolve rather than healing because it's not medical, but when we resolve a pattern, as we're in the 2000s, it's no longer a problem, right? I can go to a holistic fair without being burned at the stake for being a witch, right? I mean, some things work their way out, and it's like our personal evolution, our very, very personal DNA evolution is always tapping us on the shoulder. Is our brother locking us in still a problem? Is our sibling still a problem? Is Somebody getting into our personal papers, still a problem, right? It's like checking and checking and checking. So again, to get especially young people away from this blame victim game to, well, let's just really look at this for a second. Where was the dynamic? Where did you hit this pattern? At what point did this turn into a big emotional issue for you? And let's just back up 2 steps from that and look at what might be going on.
That is so amazing because we find in our clients, a lot of them are coming in with this ancestral stuff, mostly trauma, so that it can be healed and cleared. And so that's one way through the eye reading to recognize these patterns coming up, because it's there for a reason. It's not there to torment you, although it does.
It's
here to clear, because it clears all the way back, as you know, like through these 4,000 ancestors that you're connected to, but it also clears it moving forward. So even if you didn't have children, though, it's still clearing your line all the way forward so that book is closed.
Boy, some people are going to hear that they've got 4,000 ancestors and they've just dialed their ancestry healing up to the 10th degree, because they're like, I thought I had it all figured out. Now I got 4,000 ancestors. Holy hell.
Okay, so now I'm asking for a friend.
Sure you are.
I'm asking for a friend. Love it.
So if you have a 23, almost 24-year-old who's still living at home and very analytical and everything. Okay. And the thing is, there's a lot of young men who fit that profile right now. So it's not just my friend's child. But, there's so many questions I want to ask off of this, but when you start to see these different things, God, there's so many questions like building up in my head now. Yeah. What are you, for someone that's young like that, are you going to be able to say things that you feel like they'll take actionable? And do you start to see patterns throughout all of these similar traits? Because I know people say, well, they're Gen Z, so it all fits, but wouldn't that also be relevant in the eye,
Right.
What's my son to you? Can you fix him? No,
No, I can't.
The ultimate question right there.
Definitely can't. But when you're in the moment of wanting to scream at that 24-year-old, that's a great time to go, oh, this is so ancestral. Who went through this before me? And I'm so sorry this happened to you.
Yeah.
Let's find a way through this. But maybe cleaner answer. When I worked with social workers in Colorado, they would tell me, Amy, you will get more information out of a client in a 45-minute reading than I can get in 6 months of therapy. It's like when you're looking at the eyes together and you're like, well, look, here's this mark here, and this means this, this, and this. It's almost like you've hit some kind of subconscious unlock. And people just start saying, because they're like, oh my gosh, I'll, in the first 2 minutes, I'll be like, you've got this constant inner chatter. I've got to, I need to, I'm supposed to, I should. And they're like, oh my gosh, you don't even know me. How could you know what's going on in my head that nobody else even knows? And that's not a psychic woo-woo moment. That's that more academic point. But to your answer about the 24-year-old, yeah, I mean, why are they at home? Why aren't they inspired to move out? Right. So doing that ancestral eye reading, and then again, where could this have happened before? Could it have been during war times when you couldn't make your children move out?
Yeah. Well, because that's more the feeling, the hesitancy that I have.
Yep.
That's unreasonable to ask them, and it's just this feeling that I have.
Your ancestral issue too.
Yeah.
And not wanting to.
And that's it. Nobody's at blame because everybody's playing their parts, right?
Right.
So for example, altruism. Altruism is when we give or do something that wasn't asked for and it goes wrong, right? Like you bring somebody a pie and they're like, oh my God, I'm diabetic. What is wrong with you? That's ancestral, right? You're in it. So, but altruism oftentimes will show up when someone has had to give up a child or rehome them for their own good. The child didn't ask to be given away, right? And they may grow up with resentment that their parents gave them away, but their parents gave them away, wanting them to have a good life. So this pattern will replay. Well, hello, we're in 2023, right? How many people give up babies for adoption anymore? It's a pretty limited scenario now. The funnel's way smaller, right? But how many people have to give up their beloved pet?
Oh,
Right. They have to give up their beloved dog or their beloved cat. So the pattern will come back in whatever way it can in the 2000s. So on January, whatever it was with the White House thing, I called my husband. I was like, honey, when's the last time the White House was barricaded? Thinking it was going to be like during the Civil War, but he came up with some other time in history when it was. And I was like, so ancestral. And that's what happens is these patterns come back and come back and come back. Was it the Dixie Chicks that got in so much trouble?
who?
Was it the Dixie Chicks who got in so much trouble for
Yes.
saying
Yeah.
something, whatever kind of thing? And I was like, remember the you read, you commie? I'm like, we're right back in it. Masks. Remember during Kennedy and they had to do the gas mask drills, right, in school because so the patterns will come back in whatever way they can. And it's up to us to just spot them and go, oh my gosh, I don't believe we're doing this again.
That's a really good point because the patterns are global, not just personal.
Yeah, that was
Exactly.
I was thinking as she was saying that, I
Yeah.
was going, whoa, think bigger, bigger, bigger. And that
Right.
started to like, even though the question I was asking was based, you have got years of research ahead of you.
Sorry,
Andy, hi.
There are
Keep
books
going, keep going. Yeah, time to build your team, Amy. Yeah, so the last few years have just been a big turning of the ship, and now it's I get a little more turning as I at least get that app up and running so people can start jumping in and discovering what's out there, and then figure out what other delivery components will help the most, and figure out where the direction is going from there.
Well, two
Yeah.
more things I want to cover. And we have so much to talk about. I don't want to run out of time. First, I want you to talk about the 4 books and just in a nutshell, the difference between the 4 ancestral books. And these are fantastic because they're multiple authors giving an actionable practice at the end of each chapter. So they're super valuable. Any of them are, but what's specific about each one?
Thank you for bringing that up. And so each of them has won the International Cover Award, Coalition of Visionary Resources. And that's not my award. That's each of those very amazing, wonderful authors who've been in each of them. So as you said, 25 chapters, 25 tools. Each book has a theme. This is the first book. And the theme for this one was Reveal and Heal the Ancient Memories You Carry. So it's all about repeat patterns. The second one was all about discover and connect with your ancestors, unique ways to connect with them, unique exercises you can do with your family to learn more about your ancestry, whether you know them or not, ways you can discover them. The third one is all about gifts and talents, those lost skills. And there's even in the UK, there's what's called the Red List that comes out every year of gifts and skills and technical abilities that are becoming extinct, right? Watchmaking is on the list. Flute making is on the list. There's things you would never think of that are on the list, and they go to endangered, and then they go to they're extinct. The last person who knew how to do this is gone. So upping your ancestors' gifts because they're in your cells, so important. And the fourth book is celebrating and honoring, all kinds of unique ways to recognize, celebrate, and honor your ancestors. So each chapter, 25 or 26 per book, has a free tool of some way that you can do some great exercise with your ancestors. And then also there are 2 activity guides and journal books. And these cover, this one covers 52 weeks of connecting with your ancestors based on the chapters from books 1 and 2. So all about ancestral patterns as well as ways to connect. And this one is books 3 and 4, the gifts as well as celebrating and honoring. And they're really designed, if a family wants to do them as a family activity, like get together on Thanksgiving and everybody goes home and does the activities and then comes back and tells about the experience. It's meant to be handed down the family for generations in the future. So like, here's grandma journaling, reaching out to her ancestors from 4 generations back, and then handing it down as a keepsake for the family.
Huge.
So 80 authors and artists, tons of amazing things, planting a family tree, taking an old leather jacket and making a journal cover out of your ancestors' leather, their old purse. I mean, just cool stuff all over the place.
Wow.
And Allison was in there, and I know Will was in there in spirit with Allison.
Oh, for sure. And that was chapter 7 in the first book, if you're interested in that one. And you can find all of those on Amazon. If you
all on Amazon.
Look up Amy Gillespie Dougherty, or you can look up my book and you'll find a link to all of them.
Yep. Or the Ancestors Within. So there's actually, it was 6 books in 600 days. And that's what can start happening when you start connecting with your ancestors.
Yeah. And so what that did was that also led us to this crazy this whole paradigm about how we're not only connected to our ancestral line, and I do this because when Will does a reading, he looks at the ancestral line up here on the left, and
Mhm.
also the past life, he goes this way. So remember when we got together and we talked about, and it just was mind blowing. I can't even hold this in my consciousness of understanding about how we are a composite of not only our ancestral line and all of the people that we were, which means we could reincarnate. I could be my great grandmother back in this life, but also the past lives that we've had. And so when you consider the fact that your energy can be in both of those, it's just mind blowing.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts? Do you remember what we talked about?
Well, we talked about that there's like cellular memory and there's spiritual memory. And as you said, then there's also some super consciousness memory and aspects playing in at the same time. And the thing is, when we talked about it, we said, well, if you had a past life, let's say as a slave, for example, you may drop into a family that has a physical history or an ancestral history of being a slave, right? So, I mean, as you said, and as Samantha talked about, the research to be done. So there was a girl, I want to say it was during the 44th president, who did a science project in school with her grandfather, who was a master genealogist, comparing the ancestry of 44 of the 45 presidents. I think we were on 45 at that point. It was either 43 of the 44 or 44 of the 45. And all but one was a descendant from King John in England.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that weird?
Jimmy Carter does not look like Abe Lincoln, right? I mean, and yet every one of them, and my first question was, what about the loser, right? What about the person who lost the race? Because were they all from King Philip, right? Or were they all from, right? There's so much we don't know because
Yeah.
we haven't looked.
Yeah.
So yeah, that whole weave, is it past life? Is it the ancestral line? And how much of it is galactic, right? We're stardust. How much of this is from galactic existence or galactic interfacing as well? There's so much more to be.
It's
Right.
just
And
scratching the surface of it all. for
we are
sure.
just scratching the surface, and you have so much more to come. If I'm not mistaken, your guides told you to slow down a bit. Have you slowed down a bit? Doesn't sound like it.
No, I have.
Okay.
I have,
Taking a
although this
break.
brings a little while, but no, I'm getting my house together, getting my house in order.
There-
Both my
there-
business house and my actual existing home in order. Yes.
Do you see yourself coming down to the Carolinas at all? That way Samantha can look you up.
I love the Carolinas. My very best shows. So I met my birth mother when she lived in Bono.
Oh, wow.
Which is a tiny little beach town for those of you who don't know.
Yeah.
Just
Not
north
that
of
far from Allison and Will. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's exactly true. She just happened to be living there at the time when we first met when I was 19. The Carolinas have always been my best shows. I mean, I think I mentioned my record was 62 readings in 9 hours or something insane like that. And that was in Charlotte. I think that was in
Yeah.
Charlotte. And Dan and I actually have looked intermittently at the Outer Banks for retirement. So yeah, I love coming down that way, and I can always be coaxed.
And
There
they
you
can
go.
find your calendar on the Irigenics.com website. Is that right?
Yes. And I just a warning, the Irigenics site's going to be going under some construction as we're coming out with the new app and as we're cleaning up my debris field of the last few years. Yeah. But thankfully I've got some help cleaning it up. I'm like, oh my gosh, it just all happens so fast.
Well, you have an exciting life beyond all of this too, because your 6 years in Mozambique book is amazing. It has some of your crazy adventures. She has had, it's a wonder you're still alive. Actually,
It is really, isn't it? I mean,
it is. Yeah. So check her out on Amazon also, and on her website, irigenics.com, which will be at the bottom of.
And don't forget all the near life death moments in the Lost Scribe as well.
Right.
When I was in Guatemala.
You have that overachiever at 3 p.m. when you're whatever, right eye.
Right. It's exactly right. It's
Well,
exactly right.
What goes through my mind is all the generations to come that have you behind them, right?
Right.
That
Wow.
energy that's going to flow into them and all of the
The
exploits.
poor
that are-
dears.
Right.
We
Right.
live in an exciting time in our universe. We really, really do. We have this opportunity to really be compassionate and just with ourselves and with others, and just to really embrace What an ever abundant planet we live on. Everything we need reproduces right here. Everything. It regenerates, it reproduces. We're all here for a reason, and we're all here just, swimming in the ocean of consciousness to whatever mission we came in to do. So it's exciting.
It is. And we feel
Beautiful.
blessed to have known you and gotten to intersect with you and spent time together.
For sure.
I
So-
love you guys.
Love you too. Everybody check Amy out. And
Mhm.
thank you, Amy, for spending time with us today and agreeing to let us chat on this podcast.
This was fabulous.
Thank you to
Love
all of
sharing.
our audience who joined us for another episode of Out on a Limb podcast.
Mhm.
Until next time.
See y'all.
Bye.